while over 37% of children living in rural areas are not studying at all, only 8% are studying online on a regular basis, according to a survey conducted by 100 volunteers across the country in 15 states and union territories. It's called the School Children's Online and Offline Learning. It stands school over there. Survey, it suggests, and listen to this carefully, 48% of children are unable to read more than a few words because of that lack of exposure to education in the last 1.6, 1.7 months. The survey was conducted in 1,362 sample households in 15 states, and the impact of this lack of learning more pronounced among those who are more vulnerable. Professor Jean Dreze joins us now for more on this. Professor Dreze, we'll look at a lot of these graphics. Before I do that, I want to ask you the main point. Let's cut back to Jean. Is this a first step towards mass illiteracy, right, among a large part of our children? What has happened in the last 1.6 plus months? Is that the broader picture?
Yes, I think that India is in danger of seeing a revival of mass illiteracy among children. In fact, it's more than a danger. It is happening right now. If you go back to the Census of India 2011, let us look, for example, at the age group of 10 to 14 years or 8 to 12 years, basically around the upper primary stage. In that age group in 2011, according to the Indian census, more than 90% of children were literate. And if you look at the National Family Health Survey of 2015-16, which is consistent with that census, you see further progress. So it was maybe like 95%. So we were moving quite rapidly towards almost universal literacy in the younger children's age group. But now we are finding that the proportion of children in the 8 to 12 years age group, according to this survey, is just above 50% in rural areas. So that indicates a huge decline in literacy in the younger age groups.
So Professor Dreze, I'm going to bring out our first graphic, the reading test, percentage distribution of children by reading ability. Let's have that graphic up full screen, because I think this really reinforces the point. Look at the last column, unable to read more than a few letters, and it's got the class over there, the grades mentioned over there. In urban areas, that's the first column, and the second column is rural areas. Between class 3 and 5, 42% of children in rural areas are unable to read more than a few words. In urban areas, it's almost equally shocking. 35% of kids between classes 3 and 5 unable to read more than a few words.
Few letters, I think.
Yeah.
Few letters. Yeah, that's what your infographic says. Yeah.
More than a few letters. That's right. More than a few letters.
That's right. So, Vishnu, let me also mention
that's shocking. Absolutely.
It's very shocking. It's much worse.
Class 3 to class 5, Professor Dreze, 42% cannot read. So, what are the few letters? Because there was a sentence as well which they couldn't read.
So we gave a very simple sentence in the local language for children to read. We gave them time. We tried to encourage them, and then we assessed what they are able to read. In rural areas, only 25% of the children were able to read the sentence. We were not asking for fluent reading, even with difficulty. That only 25% of children could read the full sentence. Okay. Now, these figures are quite dramatic. We can also compare them with baseline data from the ASER survey, for example, of 2018.
Yep.
And this is very much worse. Roughly speaking, the figures that we have seem to be more or less similar to what you would have found at that time in 2018 in Uttar Pradesh, which was the worst performing state at that time. So it's like the whole of India now is becoming like Uttar Pradesh.
Okay, Professor Dreze, next graphic point. Let's have that up full screen. I want to get as many of these graphic points up as possible. So a reading test, percentage distribution of children by reading ability. Okay, that's what we did. Are children studying, right? That's the bottom line. And it's important that this is not a survey which is focused only on rural areas. It's also looked at urban areas. Not studying at all, 37%, look at the bottom, 37% are not studying at all in rural areas. And in
Right.
urban areas, 19% are not studying at all. So Professor Dreze, in Jharkhand, where you do a lot of your work, what are some of the main reasons why children are not studying at all in some rural areas?
So I think there are two main reasons. Firstly, we have clear evidence of the failure of online education, except for a small minority of privileged children.
Okay.
Even among households who have a smartphone, in the households where there is a smartphone in the family, in rural areas, we found that only 15% of children in these households are studying online regularly. And even among those 50%, there are many who are not able to follow the curriculum and so on and so forth. So it's only a very small minority of children who are able to benefit from online education. That is the first point.
Yeah.
And the second point is that very little has been done for the offline children, those who are not able to study online regularly. In Jharkhand, I can tell you, because I've talked to many teachers, they say we have not been given any specific instructions to do anything for these offline children. There may be some symbolic instructions, but actually in practice, nothing is being done for them.
Yeah.
Some states like Maharashtra and Karnataka, for example, have tried to do a little more. For example, like giving worksheets to children by way of homework. But, that's not necessarily very effective, especially when the children don't get feedback on their homework or don't understand the homework in the first place. So too little has been done to help the children who are not able to study online.
Okay.
And of course, the bottom line is that why should the schools be closed at all? I think we should also discuss that.
Well, Professor Dreze, because of COVID, but I take your point entirely. I want to move to the next.
No, I don't think it's because of COVID, Vishnu. Frankly, I don't think that's the main reason. Of course, it plays a part. I think the main reason is that the education policy is over-influenced by the point of view of the privileged parents who are reasonably happy because, their children are studying at home online in comfort and safety, and they are not so keen for the schools to reopen. And so they have far too much influence. And I think it's also because the policymakers are playing safe. They are afraid of taking a decision. They are afraid that their state will get a bad name if there are some deaths among children and so on and so forth. These are the reasons. Otherwise, I don't see why.
Professor Dreze, as I understand it, a large majority of parents in urban areas in polls conducted want their children to go back.
They want, absolutely, yes.
They do.
In our survey, we found
more than 90%. Yeah, it was there in your survey as well.
More than 90%,
Yeah.
97% in rural areas. In urban areas, there is a small minority of children, about 10%, of parents, sorry, about
Sure,
10%.
but the large majority do want their kids to go back.
Absolutely. I mean, this idea that the parents are opposed, that we have to get rid of. It is only a small minority of privileged parents.
In rural and urban areas, parents want their children to go back. Obviously,
Absolutely.
different
They are
circumstances
desperate.
everywhere.
When you ask them the question in rural areas, they ask you, why are you asking this question? Obviously, we want the schools to reopen.
All right, Professor Dreze, one last graphic point, because I need to leave it over there. Let's have this up full screen, and this is an important point. The proportion of children who live in a house without a smartphone, this is important because this has scheduled castes and scheduled tribes and others. The point being made is that those who are most vulnerable, in terms of socioeconomic factors and other factors, remain most vulnerable as far as education is concerned. Professor Dreze, how is this the case?
Sorry, I didn't catch the question.
The question is, those who are most vulnerable because
Yes.
of socioeconomic reasons or because of their SC/ST status and what that entails, how do they remain the most vulnerable when it comes to education as well?
Well, I think that, of course, is partly a chronic problem. I mean, the Dalit and Adivasi children are disadvantaged in so many ways. Economically, they are more vulnerable. Many of their children are first-generation learners, so they have no help at home. And then there are cases of discrimination. There are problems of social distance sometimes between the upper caste teachers and the Dalit and the Adivasi children. So that is a chronic problem. But that chronic problem is being reflected now in the fact that these marginalized communities are affected far more by this, what we call the lockout. And these are the people and the children for whom the policies should be made. And right now it's the opposite.
All right, Professor Dreze, I'm out of time, so I'm leaving it over there. Thank you so much for coming out with this comprehensive.
One last point.
Yeah, go ahead, sir. Really quickly.
I just want to mention, whatever you want to do, it will require money. And the budget of the education department has been cut this year, even though the overall budget of the union government was increased by a large
Yeah, you're quite
amount.
right. We can't just talk about opening schools and the schools need to be repaired as well. That's one small point that you made. I got to leave it there, Professor Dreze. We will revisit this as always. Thank you so much, sir.